The history of the Song of Moses and the people of Israel. Discover the epic story of the Song of Moses, a journey from slavery in Egypt to freedom, marked by miracles, faith, and the divine promise. A saga that reveals the powerful relationship between God and the people of Israel, and their preparation to enter the Promised Land. A tale of faith that inspires generations. Chapter 1. Oppression in Egypt. In the shifting sands of time, the story of a people chosen by divinity begins to unfold in the vast and fertile Nile Valley. The descendants of Jacob, guided by the providential hands of Joseph, found refuge and prosperity in Egypt. For years, their presence was synonymous with blessing. Their granaries brimming with grain were a testament to their labor and harmony with the land that had given them asylum. But as seasons change unexpectedly, the favor they once enjoyed turned into disdain under the yoke of a new pharaoh, one who did not share the bonds of gratitude and respect toward Joseph and his family. This pharaoh, fearful of the growing population and prosperity of the Israelites, imposed draconian measures, plunging Jacob's people into slavery. The fields they once cultivated with hope became witnesses to their suffering. The whips resonated like bitter thunders, breaking the spirit of the men, while the inhuman burdens bent their backs. The Israelites cried out to the heavens, their prayers ascending like incense, searching for relief that seemed as distant as the stars. In the midst of this darkness, the community of Israel clung to the promises made to their ancestors. Their tales of divine covenants and promised lands were the balm for their afflicted souls. The hope of liberation was not just a longing. It was a spark kept in the most remote corners of their hearts, fueled by the memory of God's works in the past. This hope would become the fuse of a great liberation, a story of redemption that would transcend generations. The Pharaoh, in his blindness, saw nothing but numbers and the labor force, ignoring the depth of the human spirit and the resilience forged in the crucible of adversity. But history, always a teacher at unexpected turns, was about to add a new chapter. One that would begin with the cry of a child by the river, a cry that would announce the start of transformation and the testament of the unbreakable power of the Spirit against oppression. Chapter 2. The Birth and Call of Moses. In a humble Israeli home, under the veil of Egyptian oppression, Moses is born, the bearer of a promise yet to be revealed. In an act of desperate bravery, his mother hides him among the reeds of the Nile, entrusting his fate to the waters that have given as much as they have taken. The current, as if guided by an invisible hand, carries the child toward an uncertain future, depositing him at the feet of the Pharaoh's daughter. With compassion, she takes him in, unaware that in her arms rests the future liberator of Israel. Raised in the splendor of the Egyptian court, Moses grows between two worlds, the luxury of his adoption and the suffering of his people. This duality forges in him a unique character, capable of understanding both power and pain. However, it is an impulsive act of justice, killing an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew, that marks his abrupt transition from prince to fugitive. In Midian, far from the pyramids and the laments, he finds refuge, family, and a new life. But destiny, with its invisible threads, weaves a plot that will lead him back to the hearts of his people. The burning bush becomes the divine stage where Moses receives his call. The voice of God, from the flames that do not consume, speaks to him of liberation, of promises, and of an exodus towards freedom. This moment, transcendental and overwhelming, seals Moses' destiny not as an Egyptian prince, but as the leader and liberator of Israel. The mission is clear: return to Egypt, confront the Pharaoh, and demand the freedom of his people. The way back to Egypt is a path into the unknown, loaded with doubts and fears. Moses, transformed by his divine encounter, must now face his past, the disbelief of his people, and the stubborn tyranny of the Pharaoh. But armed with God's promise and accompanied by his brother Aaron, he sets out to challenge the Egyptian yoke. Faith, that substance of what is hoped for, the evidence of what is not seen, becomes his banner. In this act of return lies the seed of a liberation not only physical but spiritual, marking the beginning of a saga of faith, courage, and the unbreakable quest for freedom. Chapter 3: The Plagues of Egypt. With Moses' return to Egypt, the stage was set for a confrontation of epic proportions. The clash was not only between Moses and the Pharaoh, but also between divine will and human obstinacy. The demand was simple yet revolutionary: let my people go. The Pharaoh's refusal to obey this divine order triggers a series of events that reveal God's power and determination to liberate his people. The first plague turned the waters of the Nile into blood, a direct blow to the economic and spiritual heart of Egypt, but the heart of the Pharaoh remained unbreakable. The subsequent plagues, frogs, lice, flies, death of livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, punished Egypt and discredited its gods, showing their impotence against the power of the God of Israel. However, each plague, despite its severity, found the Pharaoh and his court hardening their hearts, refusing to release the Israelites. This escalation of punishments reflected not only divine justice but also his mercy, as each plague offered a new opportunity for surrender and a new call to repentance. But the Pharaoh, a symbol of human arrogance, rejected each warning and each sign of power that challenged his authority. The 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn, would represent the final act in this dramatic confrontation. This plague was not just a manifestation of divine judgment but also a profound act of redemption for Israel. The institution of Passover, where the blood of the lamb marked the houses of the Israelites, protecting them from angelic destruction, symbolized salvation and future liberation through sacrifice. This sign, deeply symbolic, marked not only the difference between Egypt and Israel but also the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between God and his people. At dawn after the last plague, Egypt was plunged into deep mourning, a silent testimony to the cost of resistance to the divine mandate. The Pharaoh, finally broken by loss and fear, grants freedom to the Israelites. This liberation, however, was not the end, but the beginning of a journey towards true freedom, a journey that would test the faith, obedience, and identity of the people of Israel. The exodus from Egypt, marked by divine power, was the first step towards fulfilling a promise made generations ago, a step towards the promised land and towards the formation of a nation under the guidance and protection of God. Chapter 4: Passover and the Exodus from Egypt. The night of Passover became a turning point in the history of Israel, an indelible mark in the collective memory of the people. As darkness enveloped Egypt, Israeli families gathered in their homes, obeying divine instructions with a mix of fear and hope. The blood of the lamb on the doorposts of their houses was both an act of faith and a rebellion against Egyptian oppression. In that quietude charged with anticipation, the fate of two nations was about to change forever. The liberation finally granted by the Pharaoh was not a gesture of mercy, but the response to a crushing defeat. The Israelites, with the wounds of slavery still fresh, packed their lives into hurried suitcases of hope and prepared to leave the land that had been both refuge and prison. This departure, marked not only by urgency but also by the miracle of its permission, would be remembered generation after generation as a testament to the liberating power of God. The journey was not just a geographical change but a spiritual and social transformation. The march of the Israelites out of Egypt symbolized the birth of a nation under divine auspices, a chosen people to carry the torch of faith and obedience throughout the centuries. The manna from heaven and the water springing from the rock would be constant reminders of their dependence and trust in God's provision. But the newly acquired freedom would bring new challenges. Doubts and complaints would arise as surely as the sun in the desert, testing the people's faith and their leaders' patience. This dynamic of trial and provision would become the rhythm of their journey, a dance of need and miracle that would prepare them for life in the promised land. The Exodus from Egypt is, therefore, more than a historical event. It is a narrative of faith, identity, and community. It represents the eternal struggle between oppression and freedom, despair and hope, and the fundamental role faith plays in overcoming obstacles. With every step taken through the desert and with every glance towards the promised land, the divine promise guides Israel towards its destiny. Chapter 5. Crossing the Red Sea. The exit from Egypt marked the beginning of a journey that would test the character and faith of the people of Israel like never before. Soon, the euphoria of liberation gave way to anguish at the imminent danger. The Pharaoh, regretting his decision and driven by a desire for revenge, sent his army in pursuit of the Israelites. The sight of war chariots approaching, raising clouds of dust on the horizon, was enough to sow panic among the people, now trapped between the advance of their pursuers and the impenetrable waters of the Red Sea. Currently, in despair, Moses stood not only as a leader but as a mediator of faith. His voice, firm in the face of collective fear, reminded the Israelites that they were not alone. The same divine hand that had freed them from Egypt would now protect them. And so, before the incredulity of many, Moses stretched out his staff over the sea, an act of unbreakable faith that triggered one of the most astonishing miracles: the division of the waters, creating a path of escape through the seabed. The crossing of the Red Sea, with waters as walls on both sides, symbolized the definitive passage from slavery to freedom. It was not just a flight from their oppressors, it was a march towards a new identity, a confirmation of their divine choice. Upon reaching the other shore, looking back only to see how the waters closed over the Egyptian army, the Israelites deeply understood that their liberation was not the work of human cunning, but of divine intervention. This event, charged with symbolism, marked the birth of a nation under the shadow of miracles and wonders. The victory over Egypt was not only military. It was a spiritual victory, a testimony to the power of God and His unbreakable fidelity towards His people. The crossing of the Red Sea would become a fundamental tale in the collective memory of Israel, an eternal reminder that, in the midst of impossibility, faith opens paths where there are none. The celebration on the other shore was more than a relief from the avoided danger. It was an expression of gratitude and recognition of God's power and sovereignty. At that moment, the Israelites not only saw themselves as a physically liberated people but also as witnesses and bearers of a story of faith, miracles, and fulfilled promises. The crossing of the Red Sea, therefore, is not remembered only as a historical feat, but as a cornerstone of Jewish identity and spirituality, a foundation of their relationship with God and their history as a chosen people. Chapter 6. The Song of Moses. At dawn, with the first rays of the sun illuminating the newly conquered freedom, Moses and the Israelites find themselves on the opposite shore of the Red Sea, witnesses to the miracle that sealed their escape from slavery. This moment of indescribable joy and deep gratitude towards their divine liberator gives rise to the Song of Moses, a poetic expression of praise and recognition of the power and sovereignty of God over nations and nature itself. The song, raised by thousands of voices in a chorus of renewed faith, is not just a hymn of victory over the Egyptians but a testimony to God's direct intervention in the history of His people. With each verse, Moses and the Israelites reaffirm their trust in the Lord, who reveals Himself as a warrior, savior, and infallible guide towards the promised land. This hymn of liberation and hope resonates beyond the divided waters, marking an eternal commitment between God and His chosen people. The Song of Moses also serves as a moment of collective reflection on the nature of God, who, in His mercy and justice, defends the oppressed and punishes the oppressors. The song is a proclamation of faith in the divine promise of a future in which Israel will dwell in peace and prosperity in the land promised to them. This act of collective worship strengthens the identity of the Israelites as a community of believers, united by their shared history of liberation and by the hope of a common destiny under divine protection. Beyond being a tale of triumph, the Song of Moses is an invitation to reflection on the relationship between God and His people. Through its words, the importance of obedience to divine laws and commandments as a response to God's love and fidelity is emphasized. This message of loyalty and gratitude resonates through generations, reminding believers of the importance of keeping faith alive in the midst of trials and challenges. The Song of Moses, therefore, is not just a historical piece of biblical literature. It is a source of inspiration and spiritual teaching that transcends time and space. Each verse reflects the depth of the relationship between the Creator and His creation, inviting each listener to recognize the active presence of God in their life and to respond with a renewed commitment towards justice, mercy, and love. Chapter 7. Provision and Trials in the Desert. The euphoria of the miraculous escape and the victory song soon gave way to the reality of the desert. This vast landscape, with its relentless beauty and overwhelming desolation, became the stage for a new stage in the journey of the people of Israel. The liberation from Egyptian slavery had marked the beginning of their freedom, but it was in the desert that they would learn the true meaning of being a people dependent on and guided by God. The desert presented immediate challenges. The scarcity of water and food tested the faith and patience of the Israelites. Complaints and discontent began to arise, revealing the doubts and fears that still resided in their hearts. It was in this context of need and vulnerability that God manifested His provision and care in a supernatural way. The manna from heaven, the unknown food that appeared with the morning dew, and the water flowing from the rock, were daily miracles that sustained the people on their way. These acts of provision were not just responses to physical needs, they were lessons in dependence and trust in God. Through them, the Israelites learned that their survival did not depend on their ability to store resources or find solutions, but on their willingness to trust in divine provision. Every morning when collecting the manna, every time they quenched their thirst with water from the rock, there were tangible reminders of God's faithfulness and His call to live in obedience and gratitude. However, the desert was also a place of trials and purification. The difficulties faced by the Israelites revealed not only their physical vulnerability but also the imperfections of their faith. Complaints about water and food, the longing for Egypt, and idolatry in moments of despair showed the human tendency to doubt and stray, even in the face of divine care. These trials, as painful as they were, served to forge a stronger character and a deeper faith in the people, preparing them for future challenges and life in the Promised Land. The journey through the desert, therefore, becomes a powerful metaphor for the spiritual path of each believer. In its vastness and emptiness, in its ability to strip the human being of all self-sufficiency, the desert offers a space for encountering God, for reflection, and for transformation. The miraculous provisions and the trials faced by the Israelites remind us that faith is built and strengthened in dependence on God, in trust in His provision, and in obedience to His will, even in moments of greatest desolation. Chapter 8. The Revelation at Mount Sinai. After overcoming the harsh trials of the desert, the people of Israel arrived beneath Mount Sinai, a place destined to become one of the most sacred and transcendental in their history. Here, in the imposing silence of the desert, a divine encounter would take place that would mark the relationship between God and Israel forever. The mountain itself, wrapped in clouds and lightning, becomes the setting for a manifestation of the presence of God so powerful that it instills both fear and awe in the hearts of those present. Moses, acting as a mediator between God and His people, ascends the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, the fundamental principles that would govern the moral, social, and spiritual life of Israel. These laws were not mere regulations. They were the expression of the divine will, designed to guide the people towards a more intimate and committed relationship with their Creator. The giving of the law at Sinai represents, therefore, a covenant, a solemn agreement between God and Israel, where divine protection and provision are promised in exchange for obedience and fidelity. This moment of revelation at Sinai is also an act of grace. Despite the weaknesses and failures of the people, God chooses to reveal Himself and establish a covenant that defines them not only as His chosen people but as bearers of His law and justice in the world. It is a reminder that, although the relationship between God and Israel is marked by the law, it is founded on an act of unconditional love and the promise of a continuous relationship that transcends generations. The reception of the law also highlights the seriousness of God's holiness and the call to live differently from the surrounding nations. The Ten Commandments and the detailed laws that would follow structured Israeli society and served as a testimony to their unique identity as God's people. Each precept and each ordinance reflected the depth of divine wisdom and the path towards a fulfilling life under His care and direction. The experience at Sinai, therefore, was not just a historical event but a foundational moment in the spiritual identity of Israel. The law received on the mountain was not a burden but a guide towards true freedom, freedom from chaos, idolatry, and injustice. This encounter with God at Sinai would always remind them that their choice as a people was not just for their benefit but to be a light among the nations, a reflection of God's character and love towards the whole world. Chapter 9. The Construction of the Tabernacle. After the monumental revelation at Mount Sinai, the people of Israel embarked on a task that would symbolize the continuous presence of God among them, the construction of the tabernacle. This mobile sanctuary was not just a physical structure. It was a tangible testimony of the special relationship between God and Israel, a divine dwelling on earth that would accompany the people on their journey to the Promised Land. Following detailed instructions given by God to Moses, the construction of the tabernacle became a communal enterprise in which every Israelite was invited to participate, offering materials, skills, and time. This participation not only reflected the devotion and commitment of the people to their covenant with God but also served as an act of worship and gratitude. The generosity and enthusiasm with which the Israelites responded highlighted the importance of the tabernacle as a center of their spiritual and communal life. The design of the tabernacle, with its structure and furnishings, was charged with symbolism. From the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the tablets of the law, to the seven-branched candelabrum and the altar of incense, each element reflected aspects of God's nature and character, as well as the covenant relationship between Him and His people. The holiness of the space, divided into the holy place and the most holy, taught profound lessons about purity, worship, and access to God's presence. The completion of the tabernacle was a moment of jubilation and celebration for Israel, marked by the visible manifestation of God's glory filling the sanctuary. This divine presence not only validated the effort and obedience of the people in the construction of the tabernacle but also reaffirmed God's promise to dwell among His people and guide them through their journeys and challenges. The tabernacle would serve as the spiritual heart of Israel during their years in the desert and beyond, a constant reminder of God's holiness, His closeness to His people, and the importance of living in obedience to His will. More than a simple meeting tent, the tabernacle symbolized the path towards a deep and constant relationship with the Creator, inviting each generation to experience God's presence in their daily lives and to respond with worship, gratitude, and fidelity. Chapter 10. Preparations for entering the Promised Land. As the people of Israel approached the threshold of the Promised Land, a moment of crucial transition unfolded under the shadow of Mount Nebo. Moses, the leader who had guided Israel from slavery in Egypt to the gates of their destiny, faced his final days. In this time of imminent change, he offered a series of speeches that would serve as a foundation for the people's lives in the land they were about to inherit. These speeches, filled with wisdom, warnings, and promises, sought to prepare Israel for the challenges and blessings that lay ahead. The recapitulation of the law, along with the blessings and curses associated with its obedience or breach, was not just a reminder of the commandments given at Sinai, it was a reaffirmation of the covenant between God and Israel. Moses urged the people to remember the lessons learned during their journey, God's faithfulness in provision and protection, and the crucial importance of obedience to His law as the key to their prosperity and security in the new land. Furthermore, Moses performed symbolic acts of great significance, such as the anointing of Joshua as his successor, thus ensuring the continuity of leadership and divine guidance for the people. This transition of power not only highlighted the importance of wisdom and guidance in times of change, but also the need for faith and trust in God to face new challenges. Moses' final instruction emphasized the choice Israel had to make between life and death, blessing and curse, based on their obedience to God. This choice highlighted the central theme of free will and individual and collective responsibility in the relationship with God. It was a call to live in a way that reflected God's holiness and love, recognizing that the true conquest of the Promised Land would not be achieved through military strength but through justice, mercy, and humility before God. The preparations for entering the Promised Land, therefore, were not centered only on military strategy or the accumulation of resources. They were preparations of the heart and spirit. Moses, with his forward-looking vision, understood that the greatest challenges Israel would face would not come from external enemies but from the temptation to forget God and His commandments. The true victory would lie in keeping faith alive, in cultivating a community that honored its covenant with God, and in passing these truths on to future generations. Thus, the preparations for entering the Promised Land encapsulate a profound lesson about the nature of faith, obedience, and the relationship with God. They represent the closing of one chapter in Israel's history and the beginning of another, reminding each generation that God's presence and His promise to guide and protect His people remain constant, no matter the challenges the future may bring.